Well, welcome everyone to the November 2023 episode of the bi-monthly FR Panorama webinar series. I'm Larry Liberti, and together with my colleague Mario Alanis, as always, we'll be your hosts for today's webinar. It's wonderful to have you all here today. Since the start of the program, an average of about 350 participants from around the world have been registering for these informative webinars. Really impressive. As with the past webinars, registrants today represent people from more than 36 companies, from regulatory agencies, universities, NGOs, all kinds of patients and trade associations. You represent colleagues from countries across Asia and Europe, North America, Latin America, and Africa. And Mario, I just realized that although we've had participants from all of these continents, I don't think we've ever had a participant from Antarctica. And so I think what you and I need to do is get on an icebreaker,
Oh,
get down to McMurdo Station, right? And we've got to find a couple of specialists down there that can participate in our next webinar and really make this truly global. So this webinar series, as you know, was created to help stakeholders get a practical understanding of how to use Reliance and facilitated regulatory pathways in general. You know that FR Panorama is an educational program of the nonprofit RUD Foundation. It's a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and it's the sponsor of the FR Path Project. We're also very, very grateful for the ongoing support provided by MSD for this FR Panorama series. And as always, we're indebted to our advisory committee for their input and for their guidance regarding topics and the concepts that underpin this webinar series. It's our hope that by participating in these webinars, you'll continue to get a practical understanding of how to address your questions about the efficient use of regulatory practices, and in particular, to think more about the role and the benefits of regulatory reliance. And to this end, this is our sixth in our ongoing webinar series, and we're happy that you're here to learn more about the practical aspects of how to get the most value from Reliance and other innovative approaches to regulation. In our prior webinars, and you should know these are all archived on the frpath.org website under FR Panorama, we did deep dives to explore ways to optimize the use of Reliance-based pathways. So today, in this session of the FR Panorama Forum webinar series, we're going to deep dive into the effective and efficient use of Reliance pathways. And Mario, when I think about these two terms, I think simply that, to me, effective means doing the right thing. You have so many things we could do. So being effective means doing the right thing, and efficient means doing that thing right. So figuring out what you've got to do, and then do it as well as you can. So we'll be talking about effective and efficient approaches to these regulations today. But before we explore 3 best practices to use the Reliance effectively and efficiently, let me introduce you to my colleague and co-host, Dr. Mario Alanis. Mario, over to you.
thank you. Thank you very much, Larry. It is always great to participate in these webinars. And in particular, today we have a fantastic group of colleagues who will share with us their knowledge and experience. We all know that implementing or applying or utilizing Reliance requires some efforts. And today we are going to concentrate on some topics that might facilitate or refine the use of Reliance and will help make it more smooth and agile. Our speakers have either studied, analyzed, or utilized Reliance in different circumstances, and they are going to introduce us to how they faced some of their challenges and some of their difficulties to achieve a better practical implementation. So, Larry, I'm ready. Let's get started.
Okay, great, great. Thanks, Mario. Well, today's session, as usual, will last 1 hour and 15 minutes, and we hope that you'll find it to be an excellent use of your time. Uh, Please feel free to suggest questions in the chat box. You'll see it up there. And we'll do our best to monitor this and to pose these to our guests during the panel discussion section. So today we're going to look at 3 Reliance best practices. We're going to start out with Anna Litzio from AstraZeneca, and representing IFPMA. She'll be thinking about the concept of sameness and conveying consistency in submissions. It'll be followed by Jude Nokiki from USP. He'll be talking about critical thinking and applying science-based approaches to regulatory agility. And our last combination of speakers will be Patricia Cuff and Inez Adams, who will be speaking about metrics and the characterization of ways that we can understand what's actually happening with regard to Reliance pathways, and how we can use these kinds of characteristics and metrics immediately to monitor and optimize the use of Reliance. So let's get started by getting into a topic that has been on everyone's list this past year, and that's the topic of sameness. Now, as the production of medicines has globalized, it's not uncommon for a product to contain components from all around the world, as you know. And these might contain different elements that are manufactured or packaged in different facilities. Well, this can lead to the question of, is the product that is being evaluated by one agency the same as the one authorized by the reference agency? It's a good question, right? So therefore, the issue of sameness, and I'll put that kind of in parentheses, has become a talking point for good Reliance practices. Today, our colleague, I should say, from AstraZeneca, Anna Litzio, who's been intimately involved with this topic through her activities at the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Associations, that's IFPMA, is going to walk us through what we should know about the concept of sameness, how to describe it, how to use it in practice. So, Anna, over to you. You're on mute, Anna.
You're on mute.
Yes, thank you very much. Opportunity to, get the nerves of the first presenter. Okay, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. So today, as Larry noted, I would like to open the stage with one of the best practices in Reliance on terms of considering in terms of considering the sameness in terms of the product. But one of the things I want you to, for you to think humans can be the same, but also different, but also we are shaped in the environment where we live, we grow, and we live. So basically today, the agenda will consist of introduction, the reliance and the usage of the product's sameness in terms of the supply chain, but also in terms of the dossier content. But also to give you a bit more hands-on experience, we will present you 2 case studies, and also with finish, with best use ways of using assessment reports on the front of the sameness for the product in this area. So basically, many of you, if you have been in the past 5 sessions and the last session of this year, as you very well seen, many agencies adopting Reliance ways of working within the regulatory space. But this one is not going only to decrease, but it's going to increase, especially with innovative medicines, like, for example, cell and gene therapy, advanced therapies. And basically, here is very important to see how we can work effectively. So as Reliance is becoming very important, this slide is from the Who Good Reliance practices, is as agencies developing themselves, applying for World Health Organization maturity levels, is that they can, work efficiently and effectively from, having their own processes, all the way, developing work sharing, or up to adopting mutual recognition and unilateral Reliance ways of working. So one of the key things when you're adopting these ways of working, relying on your reference agency is the product the same? As Larry, noted, which is a very key question that is being raised. So, what is product sameness? So, according to the WHO guidance, is that the national regulatory authorities, adopting Reliance ways of working during the review, should verify that the medical product under assessment is the same or essentially similar to the approved of the reference authorities. What areas should be considered? And some, for example, some aspects, in terms of the quality. For example, is a qualitative and quantitative composition. Is it the same strength, form? Is it intended to be used? Manufacturing process. Also, which suppliers are being used for your, sourcing for your active pharmaceutical ingredients, quality of the excipients, but also supply, your manufacturers from the drug substance, drug product, and release. Of course, as multinational companies, the manufacturers, one of the, our mission is basically to ensure that we comply with international standards like ICH, World Health Organization, and PICS to ensure sameness of the quality product, that we provide one product, one data set, and one science with, to be patient-centric. Of course, when it comes to the sameness, is the expectation to prove the identicality can be, can raise lots of discussions and can be challenging. And usually, when it comes to the sameness and in the discussion between the manufacturers and the regulators, two aspects usually being discussed, like from the perspective of the manufacturing supply chain. Is your manufacturing supply chain, the way it's being manufactured, the same? And is basically the information that you put in your dossier, the distillment of the information of the product development is the same. And sometimes, when we are discussing sameness and you consider these two perceptions, are the products different? And in the next two slides, I'm going to talk to, I'm going to walk you through how, sometimes we have to be practical, but also to consider, how sameness can, lead to some of the interesting discussions and the challenges that lead to some of the assumptions that product can be different. So basically, when it comes to sameness into the manufacturing supply chain, is the sameness of the product does not mean that it does not mean identical manufacturers, identical manufacturing sites or suppliers, because we do know, we have seen to be agile, fast, and and to have agile manufacturing supply chain, we need frequently to have more than one manufacturing sites for our medicinal products. Also, all these manufacturing, sites, we are bound by our, standards to operate, to ensure that these multiple sites operate under the same quality international standards, procedure, and practices. Like, for example, the pharmaceutical quality systems led by the ICH Q10 to ICH Q8, note that all these sites, they have to follow, the same quality standards, procedures, and practices. However, we do know that, occasionally we can have minor manufacturing adjustments that might occur, but this does not mean that they impact the quality and the sameness, because here, when we manufacture the product, we ensure that we produce the same quality. Also, when for the product, drug product, when we come to the manufacturing, is how it's being manufactured, not the manufacturing site. Because if the manufacturing site, different manufacturing sites manufacture the same product, they follow the same quality standards, procedure, and practice, and we can show that on as scientists, then basically we should not assume that the product is different. So the other aspect, usually when it comes to the discussions between the manufacturers and the health authorities, is when we submit the dossier content. The sameness of the product does not mean identical dossiers or documentations, because regions, you have to remember, regions, agencies, countries, they have their own legal frameworks, and their legal frameworks can be different. So, for example, when we as a manufacturer submit our dossiers, we are obliged to meet that jurisdiction-specific requirements. Also, the other key thing is, of course, we're trying to be, harmonized on our dossier structures. For example, utilizing the common technical document structure as per ICH and for guidance. But also there will be some differences because of the modular is region. It's the regional modular one. So you'll have difference between, for example, Europe or US. But this does not mean if you apply Reliance, that your product is different. From a transparency perspective. Also, there are different, difference between the reference agency and the national dossier, as we'll show you later on. But essentially, it's the same quality attributes. So one of the key questions usually is being raised when it comes to the sameness discussion is that why not supply a clone copy of the SRA dossier with the details beyond the national requirements? Now, of course, this one, in our experience, shows, it can raise risks in terms of the continuity of the supply product to patients due to the dossier lag. Let me unwrap it a bit this. When your product is being approved, basically we come to the life cycle management, and the post-approval changes how are managed in the SRA versus to NRS differ, for example, and this is one of the things we need to optimize. For example, in the SRAs, the post-approval changes, for example, minor changes, can be handled in different ways, like from simple notifications all the way to bundling or parallel changes. In the national regulatory agencies, what we see in the post-approval change area, lots of the changes, they need to fully being reviewed and approved, and sometimes, if you get more information, and depends how your post-approval change is managed, this means that your product might take longer, to adopt all the new changes. So this leads to the manufacturer to ensure that the product complies with that NRA's local requirements, might need to put, a wait, for the approval that might take longer. Longer than, for example, in the SRA, and to ensure that we're sure to avoid any shortages. But still, we need, in one of the opportunities is how we can really improve our post-approval changes across the globe. So for us really to have, to build this, mutual trust, to build, the transparency, but also the convergence and the harmonization to bring our products faster across all our patients on this globe. IFPMA believes to build the mutual trust and the transparency, we have to work on 3 areas to highlight the differences, because this, shows, transparency, using, ensuring the quality, efficacy, and safety of the product. Not only this one, but also through, learning to, through this experience, because sameness is a discussion point that has been, has been developed over the past few years, is, through working together through workshops, trainings, and etc., with the industry and with the regulators. But also, not only this one, to apply regulatory convergence, working with the ICH and the World Health Organization to infuse sameness concepts based on through our experience. But of course, I say, okay, so this is all concepts. Can you provide us some hands-on experience? So basically, I will give you one example from the, kind of from a supply chain perspective and from a dossier content. So basically here we have a case of a biologic where basically the change was a different release site. The reference agency was EU, and basically, in the EU, we are mandated that the release site has to be inside within the European Union area. And that has to be certified by the QP. Now, in a number of countries, we used, a Reliance strategy with the EU as a reference and explaining why we have this difference. There was a number of countries that did accept the company justification. I will give you a bit more detail later on, but there are other agencies that for this innovative medicine, they did not accept, and they did their own full assessment. So basically, to justify from the right to the left in the green, everything was the same with the exception of the release site in the Europe. So basically, the manufacturer did explain the differences, from a transparency perspective. Also, they noted, about this. Monoclonal antibody, the difference about the EU legislation, and anything else was the same from a drug substance to drug product, and that was that's the good practice of how you justify your sameness following the World Health Organization guidance and practice. So also in terms, what about when it comes to the dossier difference? And you have to remember that one jurisdiction, one legal framework is not the same. And here we want to show you some examples. But this does not mean that the quality of the product is different, because our legal frameworks are different and we have to comply with our different jurisdiction differences, while the quality of the product is the same and demonstrated. Like, for example, the difference in the level of the details due to the country can be different due to the local specific requirements. Like, for example, in a reference agency, if it's a biological product, they might want to know about the manufacturing site of the master cell bank or the working cell bank. We need to register. But in some of the international, in some other of the agencies, we don't need to declare this one in our dossier. Or they want, for example, the resin limit, information, the microbial hold validation, for example. But also some other specific, requirements, in the Reliance country could be certificate of analysis for drug substance or drug product, method validation, raw data, or, for example, stability chromatograms of all the stability time points. Like, for example, a much more hands-on experience. So there was this case study where we have an ADC and in the module 3. And when it came to the linker information, basically, for the US FDA, which was a reference agency, we had to submit it through the drug master file path, for example. But in the other countries, we did include it within the module 3 because, for example, they don't have a drug master file legal framework. So these are two different ways of working within two different jurisdictions, but this does not mean that the quality product was different. Actually, it was the same. Also with stabilities, because as they are, in the stability, you have to remember this, the product changes will generate more information. And sometimes when we submit our dossier to the Reliance country, we submit more data that we gain. So this means, if you submit more update data, doesn't mean that this is different when they were submitted to the reference agency. But basically, it's the same product, it's the same quality, but we are providing the most updated information. So basically, before going to this one, what we gave, so we presented some case studies from the supply chain, but also from the dossier content. As you well applying, scientific principles, international standard, and dialogue, we can say that even there are some differences, basically, in the end of the day, what we are, submitting as, we're submitting one product, one quality, one data set, and one size. And of course, as the product evolves, we will provide, updated data, but also we have to comply with the jurisdiction. Another also way of leveraging sameness is the public assessment reports that are being produced by the reference agency. This is a good way of, NRAs to leverage. For example, if you utilize the assessment report, in terms of process, you might not use the memorandum of understanding, or confidentiality agreement, because they are public assessment report. In terms of, more, capability uplift, increasing the maturity of your regulatory agencies, to show also the sameness, but also the transparency of how a product is being produced, the NRAs could, start producing and selling their own public assessment reports, because there you can, you can talk about the quality, about the efficacy and safety, and the data they support in terms of their assessment also support, referring also to the reference agency. And this one, it can help also the discussion between NRAs within the region or across regions. Of course, if public assessment reports are not feasible, there are always different ways, because this slide, what it shows is that you can take a concept, like the, assessment reports, and just to discuss in terms of sameness among health authorities can be many different ways of doing. And of course, if, due to legal frameworks, you cannot do confidentiality or MOU, always you can work with the manufacturer to find the best way to provide additional information to demonstrate sameness. So basically, this is my last slide. So what I demonstrated to you in terms of sameness, if you remember, humans, we are humans, all of us are the same, but we're also are different, because in the place, area that we arise. But in terms of our products, when we assess our products as scientists, we have to think the quality, the safety, and the efficacy with the principles of sameness. And this is the closure of my presentation. And I hope I have educated the sameness, and I hope we come next year with your experiences and have further discussion.
Thank
That's
you very
great.
much.
Thank you. Mario, I just have one quick question for Anna, just as a clarification, because some of our participants may not be familiar with the term that you used in your one slide of linker information. And could you just take 2 seconds to explain from a practical standpoint what linker information is?
Yes, so basically, this is when you have a biologic product, linkers, for example, when you a linker is a link between when you do the combined antibodies with different parts. The linker is being used, for example, to combine like an immune response, external part in your on your molecule with an internal part that is allowed to link to attach itself to the to the cell. Like, for example, and you need to have the linker to combine it. So this is this is some and it's very well known. For example, those ones who are familiar with cell therapies like CAR Ts, what you do, you tell a T cell receptor part to attack the T cells, and then you combine it with a part within your cell cancer. So then you combine, but you need a linker, right? And then,
okay, great.
So this is what this
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you for that. Mario.
Yes, thank you very much, Anna. It was a great presentation about a topic that is so relevant nowadays, that there is so much discussion, and I'm sure there will be a lot of questions. But, high quality reliance practices have to be characterized largely by agility. And agility means being flexible, being adaptive, while remaining consistent and predictable in one's actions. Our research in FRPath database has shown that agencies that have characteristics to be agile, such as having verification, abridged, and full review pathways, are able to effectively and efficiently meet their goals of providing timely availability to quality of safe and effective medicines. Today, Dr. Jude Nwokike, the Vice President and Director of the Program for Promoting Quality of Medicines Plus, PQM Plus, at USP, has had the opportunity to work with agencies of all maturity levels around the world to see how they are thinking about regulatory agility to meet their goals. Welcome again, Jude. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mario, and I hope you can hear me.
Yes,
Wonderful.
perfect.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I really want to thank you for inviting me. And I also want to thank Anna for setting the stage. I think Anna's presentation dwelled deeply on sameness. And in my presentation, we'll begin to talk a little bit about what happens where there are no sameness and some form of review is indicated. And as you know in life, the devil is always in the details. So I might not have
Right.
time to get into all those details, but I'll leave you with some reflections on some of these issues that we confront. So as Mario introduced me, I'll be talking about the critical thinking, applying science-based approaches to regulatory agility. We all know what the current state is. Right now, if you have a new chemical entity, a new drug, you have several levels of review. The country of origin, which may be in the global north, or anywhere it is that the product was discovered. The reference agency, which is typically some of the regulatory agencies we used to call stringent regulatory authorities. It could be USFDA, it could be EMA. At times, some of those products, depending on the type of product and whether it's used in global health programs, it could go through WHO pre-qualification. And then there's a national review in some of the countries where the product is utilized. And so when you have these multiple levels of review, it often leads to hundreds of dozens and thousands of post-approval change reviews over many years. Some estimates have put it up to 10 years. And those changes also are meant to accommodate continual improvement, maintain the quality control, and then, introduce innovation that makes for a much more better manufacturable product. So these are very, very important changes that are needed. Some of them are pre-approval changes. And so the regulatory agency have to spend time to review those dossiers. So this all leads to a lot of time lost in granting access to the product to those in most need. And also it leads to very inefficient system. And so as you look into the desired state, where do we want to be? You really want to be in a situation where there is an efficient system. And I think Larry, in his introductory remark, mentioned about effectiveness. It has to be effective as well. But looking at efficiency, to enable efficiency, you want to leverage the review product, or particularly of reference agencies. You want to leverage that. There isn't any value in duplicative review. And so part of ways of doing that is that it could be a recognition where it's either mutual or is unilateral. And there are just a lot of details about what is important for recognition to happen, which includes that there has to have been, legal infrastructure or legal things that put in place to ensure that their country regulation, who have its own sovereignty, is allowed by their own law to recognize the decision of the reference agency. But anyways, besides the recognition, which requires the list of burden on the regulatory authority, the rest is verification review, which you can liken to sameness that Anna spoke to. So a verification of sameness. And indeed, you will see that it takes a little bit of some review, but you can imagine that when that is done very well and done quickly and efficiently, it will take probably just about 30 days or thereabout for the regulatory authority to be able to come to a decision. And then there is the abridged review. The abridged review is a review that I'll speak a little bit more to because it's that really also leads to expenditure of some time by the regulatory authority, but still has the same goal to at times dramatically reduce the time spent in reviewing dossiers, given that there are reference agencies that have had a look at that product. Beyond the efficiency, other things that are needed very much to the title of this presentation is you need agile and science-based approach if we are going to get to that desired state of timely access to these new medicines, either for public health emergencies or for medical needs. If you have to get to that, there has to be agile system in place. And I would join Mario in his definition. So I really think that when you talk about agile and science-based, we should be talking about the ability to review and quickly arrive at conclusions on the quality, safety, and efficacy of medical products. So the key thing here is quickly arriving at regulatory decisions. And that exercise should be in response to public health needs. That's why you want to be agile. That's why you want to get the product to the people. It requires science-based approach. You need to understand, if there are differences between the dossiers submitted or between the content of the dossiers as submitted to the reference agency and what you're reviewing. Now, how much of those differences have really serious and important issues with that impact on the quality and safety of the product? Then it has to be focused. Agile and science-based processes are focused on desired product attributes. For instance, the quality target product profile, which you should be the North Pole in really ensuring that the product is meeting those expectations. So if it's not, and target product profile as a whole, not just in the quality aspects of it, if it's not, what are the instruments in place to ensure that you probably could get to that? And then it has to focus on those changes, as I mentioned, some of those changes that may have the potential for adverse effect on the product. Now it's very, very challenging to get there, but I think I would like to really reference this article to most of you to spend some time and go through that, because it for me, it helped to document some of the experiences we saw during COVID-19, even though it was written in between, not when the full experiences have been gathered, but it went into addressing some of the key things that were experienced and practical things that really lends itself to why regulatory agility is very, very important. The authors reviewed a bunch of about 1,700 documents that are related to how health agencies are reacting to the COVID-19. And out of that 1,700 plus documents, they teased out about 343, about 20% of them, that directly addresses regulatory agility. And some of the things they try to group those 20% plus documents within those agility documents that are addressing facilitated regulatory pathways or facilitated product introduction. Those that are addressing the need to strengthen international collaboration, those that are addressing the regulatory burden for the adoption of electronic and digital tools. And so this really helped to capture most of the experiences from a regulatory agility perspective, most of the experiences during COVID-19. So a very, very interesting read. But getting to a little bit more of the details now, what makes Reliance work? What are, like I mentioned at the beginning, the devil is in the details. What makes Reliance work? Well, it works better when they are streamlined dossier submission. Some of you may be familiar of some of the discussions that are currently going on. They are very preliminary discussions, but what about the one global dossier, particularly for the quality part of the dossier? One global dossier that is somewhere, maybe in the cloud. Excuse me, that may be somewhere in the cloud, and regulatory agencies around the world are able to access that. So how do we streamline dossier submission? Then there's the full adoption of ECTD and relevant data standards. Because again, if we're going to talk about sameness, if we're going to talk about efficient review, the order, the format at which you receive those dossiers have to be consistent. And I spoke about the public assessment reports. It has to be there. Most of them are readily available. But also the review coming from the agencies that are often redacted. I think there's a great value in having access to them and having access to high quality summaries. And we often say that, well, stringent agencies or reference agencies should know that their review products are, in a sense, public goods. Public goods that can help to reduce duplicative and inefficient efforts around the world. Then electronic and digital tools are key. They're very important in making Reliance work. And then, of course, abridged review guidelines. Guidelines that go into the details of the review. And then manuals that help reviewers to know how to conduct or implement a bridge review. So that is the part I'll speak a little bit more in the remaining time of this presentation. So one of that is to really show you an example of the ways of thinking about an abridged review through the idea of an integrated pre-approval summary that can be utilized when there are already legal infrastructure for expedited introduction of new medicines. And as we were working on this sort of initiative to articulate this sort of framework, one of the things that came to mind is what part of the dossier will provide enough summary, integrated summary, that the regulatory authority can go through. So as against going through the tens of thousands of pages, is there a way to find aspects that they can look at that counts into some hundreds and be able to come out with a summary that they can utilize to make their own decision? And this is against the backdrop that you're introducing a new medical product during an emergency, and as well as within a period, within a disease area that have unmet needs. And so to be able to do that, you also need to have a very robust post-approval system. And so the framework that we were articulating truly involve the integration of disparate pre- and post-approval review data on quality and safety of products from all sources in the dossier, and then to produce a summarized information that facilitates early access and safeguard patient safety. And as you can see in the screen, there are three broad areas we called out for that integrated pre-approval review. And that's the summary of clinical safety. You find these in Module 2. Then you have, of course, the quality overall summary, which is really the mainstay of what you see there. And between the summary of clinical safety and the quality overall summary, being able to tease out from the rest of the dossier and maybe also within the Module 2, aspects that address the benefit risk assessment of the product. And this involves the country that is trying to introduce the product being aware of their own epidemiology, their own medical practice, their own environmental conditions that might impact on the way products are used in their country. So using this information, there could be the consolidation of a summary that can be used against the target product profile of that product and what the product was expected ideally to attain. Now, that can facilitate a timely approval of that product, as against a situation where this sort of review and summarized review doesn't exist. That could take years and years before the regulatory authority arrives at a decision. I want to add that the right side of this graphic is showing you the integrated post-approval surveillance system that a priori need to be in place for you to be able to have a timely introduction of these products. If they're not in place, there is a great danger because the agency and the country does not have any recourse in being able to understand the performance of the product post-approval. So a little bit of what additional details that you may see in this sort of framework. So here we're looking at the tools for successful implementation of this sort of framework we put out earlier. These tools are meant to look at the pre-approval side and the post-approval side and see whether there are exact checklists or procedures or manuals that exist that can enable those agencies to implement it. For instance, there has to be the law in place, of course, already. The expedited programs have to be in place that allows for early access. So policies on early access legislations and guidelines, Reliance regulations and Reliance guidelines need to be in place, right? And then you have pre-approval. You need to have reviewers' guidance on how to conduct these sort of integrated reviews. You have to have benefit risk assessment frameworks. Of course, the agency must require the submission of CTD and the quality overall summary of that CTD. The reviewer has to understand on how to review that. The agency must already have adopted the pharmaceutical quality system regulation guidance. And when you get to post-approval, there's a bunch of things. I won't go through that, but really take our time to go through this. These are specific tools that need to be in place in the country to really build confidence that if they move ahead to take a very quick decision on this product that is recently developed, a new chemical entity indicated for a disease, that they will be able to follow up in capturing anything that's going on about the performance of the product. And the lack of this robust, a statement on the left-hand side is talking about that the lack of the robust post-approval surveillance system that can comprehensively track product performance and patient experience disincentivizes early access. Inadequate post-approval systems forfeit opportunity for expanding product knowledge. So regulators ought to delay approval decisions, preferring instead to learn more on the quality and safety of the product before approval. So one of the things to take home from this presentation is the need to build out those post-approval systems ahead of the introduction of some of these newer products. And so we've got a lot of experience doing that, a lot of experience helping countries to build post-approval systems, not just in product quality surveillance, but as well as really robust systems to enable them quickly review products and to use Reliance pathways. So what you're seeing on the screen is experience out of Uzbekistan, where our program was able to look at the World Health Organization WHO collaborative registration procedure and utilize that to guide the Uzbekistan regulatory authority on how to introduce an anti-TB product in their country, a product that already had WHO pre-qualification, right? So this is a practical example that helped them to dramatically shorten the time that they typically use to review products. And there are several other experiences where in close to 10 countries, we've been able to help them to develop policies, regulations, and guidelines to support the introduction, the introduction of Reliance pathways. And this often includes details about, which are the reference agencies that are going to accept dossiers from, as a reference that they're going to use as reference for reviewing their dossiers, the condition that those dossiers must come to them in CTD format, what are the aspects that they will be looking further into, for instance, stability studies, sameness, as Anna mentioned, and a host of other things. And we've had also an opportunity to help several other countries in developing emergency use authorization guidelines. And these were really coming out at the back of COVID-19 pandemic. So I'll leave you with those thoughts and thank you.
Very good. Jude, that was super comprehensive. I feel very agile now. And but actually, you've given us some very, very good things to think about. And one of the things you talked about leads very well into the next presentations. And you were talking about disincentives to early access. Really, this is something we don't often talk about. And so to continue into this deep dive, it's my pleasure to introduce our final guests, Patricia Cuff and Inez Adams. So you may know that last year with our colleagues at Utrecht University in the Netherlands, Mario and I saw that almost all the research that we ran into about Reliance focused on how to best implement Reliance, but it didn't generally focus on understanding why to implement Reliance and how would you use measurable impacts to understand these concepts of why would you want to actually put Reliance in place. So to better understand Reliance's benefits and their downsides in a more holistic manner, Mario and I and our colleagues at Utrecht proposed the concept of Relionomics. And we defined it as a structured framework for the assessment of the impact of regulatory reliance pathways on the regulatory, the economic, societal, and other systems. Well, it turns out that in parallel, Pat and Inez, in their roles at the U.S. National Academies of Science, were also investigating the kind of metrics and characteristics that could be used to assess the value of Reliance. And when it comes to Reliance, one of the keys to success is being able to monitor its effects and its outcomes. And so today, we're really thrilled that Pat and Inez have joined us to share some of their pioneering work on monitoring and optimizing the use of Reliance. So to you, Pat, and then Inez.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Larry and Mario, and really all the organizers of today's conference, giving us an opportunity to talk to you about metrics and characteristics for monitoring and optimizing the use of regulatory reliance. As you heard, I'm Patricia Cuff, and I'm joined by my partner in crime here, Dr. Inez Adams. And you'll be hearing from Inez in a little bit. So next slide, please. So the origins of what we're going to be talking to you today about really go back to the National Academy study that was published in 2020. Both Inez and I worked on this study, and it was provided with support from the FDA's Office of Global Policy and Strategy. And those of you who have your phone handy, you can use the QR code and you can go right to the report. And we'll be showing the QR code again in case you want to grab your phone. Next slide, please. So this is the committee that worked on the study. It was led by Alistair Wood. There were 12 members of the committee, and Alistair was the chair. Next slide. So the committee formulated one conclusion and 6 recommendations. The conclusion was that regulatory authorities at all levels, be it high resource, medium resource, or low resource levels, they must find ways to continue or expand their ability and their willingness actually to work together in order to try to maximize the use of their very finite resources and really for the good of public health. And this is something that you're going to hear repeated throughout this today's talk. So I want to start off with maybe a little story. If we could go back one slide. I want to start off with a little story, and it's at the start of the pandemic. So my mother was having trouble finding face masks. So she went online, like most of us did, and she ordered from some website. And then when the face masks appeared, she was shocked to learn that they actually came from Malta. And she repeatedly said these were the best face masks she'd ever gotten. So now what I want to do is use this example to show the positive impacts that globalization can have on public health. We often think about the negative impacts. This is an opportunity to think about the positive impacts of globalization, but also that regulatory reliance is an essential tool for regulators to act quickly and collaboratively in times of public health emergencies, really for the good of the population and, of course, for my mother. But the committee also argued that regulatory reliance is just as important during non-emergency times to allow for more efficient use of the resources and really ultimately serving the patients by facilitating earlier access to quality assured, safe, and effective medicines, as well as medical products like the face mask that I just described. Next slide, please. So this is a figure that came from the report that shows how building confidence and trust can start with basic information sharing and harmonization, and that's kind of the bottom of the pyramid. And this leads to informal reliance and work sharing activities that further build trust and confidence, and that would be like the middle section of the pyramid. And then those reliance activities, things like pilot tasks, working groups, work sharing, these can lead toward more formal recognition agreements, which would be at the very top of the pyramid. And as I mentioned, a key objective of medicine's regulatory authorities is to promote and protect public health by ensuring that the quality, safety, and efficacy of the medicines and the medical products that are available. Next slide, please. But a challenge called out by the National Academy's committee when using reliance and recognition arrangements is how do you know you're actually impacting public health? So while the impacts seem intuitive, there's currently a dearth of metrics for evaluating the public health metrics, be it positive or negative, of the reliance-based agreements. So this brings us to the committee's 6th recommendation in the report. Next slide, please. That calls upon regulatory authorities to co-create a results framework. This framework should contain clearly described indicators or metrics and processes for monitoring and measuring the results of the reliance arrangements and their impacts on public health, as well as benefits to the regulatory authorities themselves. And with that, I'd like to hand the microphone over to my colleague, Inez Adams. Dr. Adams, over to you.
Thanks, Pat. As a follow-up to the NASM study that Pat just described, with funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we decided to take on the challenge of exploring metrics that could be used to measure the public health impact of reliance-based pathways. We designed a mixed method study to query individuals knowledgeable about reliance-based pathways to get their input on what metrics would be most important to include and a framework designed to measure the public health impact of Reliance. We started with the quantitative phase, which we invited 810 people to complete a survey. The recruits were identified because they expressed interest in either the consensus study or previous NASM webinars, or through the collaborators networks. Ultimately, 70 respondents completed a 12-item survey, which instructed them to rate on a 5-point Likert scale the importance of including 11 metrics in a framework that would measure the public health impacts of Reliance-based pathways. And these metrics that we chose were informed by existing literature and discussions with subject matter experts. The scales range from not important at all to extremely important, and participants were also given the option of suggesting 2 additional metrics. And then for the final question, they were asked to identify the 5 metrics they thought were most important to include and rank them in order of importance. 70 individuals completed a survey. The majority of the respondents were from the pharmaceutical industry, followed by people who worked for regulatory authorities. For the qualitative phase, we interviewed subject matter experts identified through the researchers or collaborators networks, and we invited them to discuss the quantitative survey results. And so for this sample, it included regulatory people who worked at regulatory authorities from 4 different regions, public health agencies, patient advocacy organizations, and then industry representatives. Each interview lasted about 30 minutes, and then we just, use standard qualitative data analysis practices to analyze the data. These are the 11 metrics that were included in the survey. Just in the interest of time, I'm not going to read them all, but you can access our lovely open access paper if you'd like to see them more. And these are the top 5 metrics that respondents thought were most important. I will read these. Ability to meet targeted product assessment timeline, increase access to expertise that is limited to or not available in the agency, shorten median number of days to market for medical products, lower morbidity and mortality rates due to greater access to medical products, and movement toward technical standards harmonization. I should mention, though, that of the 11 metrics that were chosen initially, respondents did rate all of them as being important or extremely important to include in the framework. For the qualitative interviews, we've talked to subject matter experts and got their feedback on the top 5 metrics. And these are the results that stuck out. The results indicated that collecting timeline data is feasible, but maybe not the most important metric. Without a more focused examination of where time is saved. For example, shortening a timeline that would improve drug lag would be more important than shortening a timeline tied to fee regulations. And while lower morbidity and mortality is a noble goal, regulatory authorities really focus on approval. In other words, making sure that quality, safe, and efficacious medical products make it to market. So what happens after approval, a lot of times, is beyond their control. Increased access to expertise is important, but may be more important for lower resource RAs. Harmonization would set clear goals, clear guidelines for critical aspects of inspection, but even there are some nuances. And some propose that maybe we should have multiple frameworks. That may be ideal because the local and regional context is really important. So, for example, some suggested that it may be more appropriate to have one framework for well-resourced regulatory authorities and another framework for lower resource regulatory authorities. Based on the participants' narratives, we came up with this framework for measuring the public health impact of reliance-based pathways. Regulators are focused more on process metrics like meeting timelines and shortening the median number of days to market. Increased access to expertise and movement towards technical standards harmonization have the potential to improve the process and shorten timelines, but the main overall objective for RAs, once again, is to provide approval for medical products that meet quality, safety, and efficacy standards. So for them, the most important metrics are those that measure the ability of Reliance pathways to get them to this approval finish line. Outcomes such as patient access and lower morbidity and mortality can be influenced, once again, by a number of post-approval factors. While these metrics have the potential to demonstrate the value of Reliance to regulators and other key stakeholders, some cannot easily be captured at this time, and they stop short of measuring the greatest return on investment, which is building a culture of reliance. In order to get to a place where reliance is a standard practice, building trust is essential. Trusted relationships are the foundation of a reliance culture. So these are our recommended best practices for today. Stakeholders can begin to build trust immediately through the sharing of data and information, collaboration, open communication, transparency, and capacity building. And then we just wanted to acknowledge our colleagues and funding sources. So we'd like to thank the FDA for commissioning and funding the National Academy study, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for funding our follow-up mixed method study. We would like to thank Dr. Murray Lumpkin for his support and feedback throughout both studies, and Dr. Larry Liberti for collaborating with us on the mixed method study and co-authoring the manuscript. And thank all of you for attending today.
Well, thank you, Pat and Inez. That was just really a wonderful overview of what I thought was a seminal study. Very well designed, and so much good information came out of that study. So, now we've heard from our three groups of presenters and have learned some very interesting aspects of what we're looking to apply in terms of making Reliance more efficient and effective. We have a little bit of time to dig deeper into these, and we have some questions and some feedback. And so I thought that maybe I would just take one of them, which has to do with a topic that almost all of you talked about, which focuses on these public assessment reports and data sharing. So Pat and Inez, you talked about the value of sharing information and sharing data. And Anna and Jude, you talked about public assessment reports and how they can inform Reliance decisions. Now we know that there's a variety of approaches to creating public assessment reports. And I was wondering if any of you have given thought about conversations that are ongoing with regard to standardizing what a public assessment report should include to actually facilitate Reliance. Because, if I go back years and years ago, when public assessment reports first came on the scene, they weren't created to be used as part of a Reliance process. They were there to document a decision. But they've evolved into a tool, as you were talking about, Jude, that these are tools to help with decision making and regulatory agility. So I'll leave it to Jude and Anna maybe for this question. Are we moving towards developing a more standardized approach to public assessment reports?
Thanks, Larry. I think that's a very important question. And indeed, my short answer would have been, I wish we are moving towards that direction, because it would be immensely valuable, particularly for countries where their agency isn't at the level to really review new chemical entities and new products that are emerging, innovative products. And so the public assessment reports that exist now, particularly from the European Medicine Agency, TGA, WHO, and the rest, is just marginally useful to the regulatory authorities, given that they are much more high level and broad based. With USFDA, I think there's also a value that you have the drug approval package. And so but that's you literally can get lost in the swarm of data and the information that is there. But when you go into the reviewer's summary or comments, I think a lot of that are highly redacted. So all that is to say that, yes, there is a gap that is currently existing. How can you get to standardize public assessment reports that are intended for regulators? The key word is that is intended to enable regulators to arrive at a decision, rather than as public assessment reports that are really intended for the general public. So the regulators need additional information. They need to get closer to the science. And that's why we talked about the need to look at the quality overall summary, look at the summary of clinical safety, look at benefit risk assessment, and tease out something there that can help regulators. Thank you.
So maybe there's an iteration in terms of what might be called the regulator's assessment report. We know there are already these reports that regulators create, and through memorandum of understanding and other legal approaches, they can share sometimes those kinds of internal reports. But maybe there's an opportunity to standardize those regulator assessment reports. Anna, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think with Jude, I think I agree. I think I think as it evolved, assessment reports, it was a tool, and it is being useful. But I think if we want to build more on reliance, and due to the fragment, different standards in terms of assessment, maybe it needs to be consider maybe at World Health Organization or ICH level of how such an assessment report is being developed. I mean, we have seen, for example, the USFDA, for as a part of the Project Orbis and ARTO, real-time oncology review, they have the assessment aid where between the manufacturer and, for example, the and the USFDA, there's a much more detailed kind of review and putting down in writing how you come to this kind of decision making. But I think if I pivot from, but we'll have to be very careful, because we already have all these, documents. I said we have the module 2, so trying to reinvent a new assessment report. Someone has to be kind of very, very practical. So there could be something, because like assessment report from regulators is that it depends on the expertise, depends on the, to how much level you want to do. So I think to build, it could be something between building the, module 2 utilization with the assessment report. It could be, for regulators to have one standard, at least on template. So then, is consistent across all of the health authorities to enable, the utilization.
Great. No, well, there's an opportunity for all of us to think about the next iteration. Pat and Inez, you brought up the concept of a more holistic view of reliance pathways and assessing reliance pathways. And your graphic showed that there's also this kind of public health impact. And that's something that, we've talked about a lot with regard to Relionomics, is that, reliance pathway, yes, has that immediate impact for getting medicines, making them more available more quickly. But there's sometimes a negative impact, within the agency. Maybe the agency doesn't learn as much by going as deep as they might. They might not be able to develop their skills as quickly as they'd like to review products. But on the other hand, there are many, many benefits. And so during your research, can you talk a little bit more about these more broad public health impacts that some of the participants brought up as being important to think about when we think about these pathways?
So if it's okay, I'll get started and then I'll hand it over to Inez to jump in. I think one of the issues, as was mentioned, is this notion of transparency for the public good, to be able to see more of the assessment reports and to be able to share, some regulators heavily redact their reports. And it's very difficult to learn from reports that have been heavily redacted. And I think that this notion of work sharing and transparency, I think this all builds towards greater trust, as we talked about. And then that leads to greater sharing of information, which then builds additional trust and more confidence. So I think this notion of access and transparency across the different regulators, be it high, medium, and low resource, I think that would probably be what I would emphasize. Inez, I don't know if you want to add to that.
I think the only thing I would add is the idea of having multiple frameworks and looking at public good from local perspectives was interesting. So some of the more well-resourced agencies, for example, didn't see, I guess, the immediate benefit to them, but it was beneficial to them to exchange ideas and information with colleagues from other well-resourced. So, again, ultimately, that is a public good, right?
Great, great. Well, as always, this has been a very special session. Thanks very much. We believe that Reliance pathways are valuable, and today we've taken additional steps to understand simple next steps that we can all consider to optimize the effective and efficient implementation of Reliance. And each speaker has left us with really brilliant insights and practical advice that, Mario and I think could each of us take and implement today if we wanted to. And so I'd like to summarize just a couple of the high level actions that we should think about. Can I do something with these? And the topic of sharing data and information, that for an agency to rely, they must trust the provenance and the findings of another NRA. So to build into that, what we learned is that to develop Reliance review guidelines, tools, standard operating procedures, and following international guidelines and formats is actually critical. So if you think about what you do, do you have these activities in place? Do you have SOPs internally? If we can come back to that slide again. Second bullet is to develop and share things like public assessment reports, confidential review documents. Should there be MOUs in place? If you go back to sessions previous that we've done in our archive, we've talked about memorandum of understanding and their value. And then the last bullet is digitization. How do we facilitate access to this massive information, both pre-approval and, as Jude said, post-approval? Do we have the right post-authorization systems in place? So as I said, importantly, I think we can each think about how we can individually and even within our own organizations consider, how do we implement one or more of these particular actions? Are you doing it already? Should you be doing it? And how could you do that? So I'm going to finish up by reminding you that a recording of this session will be archived shortly on the frpath.org website. I'd recommend you go there for lots of other information about facilitated pathways. We really hope that you can use the observations and suggestions that you heard today in your activities. So stay tuned for details about our next webinar in this series. And remember to check out all the resources, as I mentioned, at the frpath.org website, where you can find a whole lot more information about Reliance and other facilitated pathways. So once more, Mario and I would like to extend a very special thank you to our guests, Anna, to Jude, Pat, and Inez. Thanks very much for taking your time today. Mario and I want to thank you, our participants, for your interest and participation, and all our best until we meet again.
Thank you.